Teams are all around us, and few important things in our lives are achieved alone. And yet, most of us still wonder, how can I lead my team to be more effective? How can I create perhaps the best team ever? Today, you're going to get some new ideas on exactly how to do that. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively, make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast, you could join us in the future live. And the way to do that, do live on your favorite social channel. And to do that, you can go to our Facebook page or our LinkedIn page to learn more, find out when we're doing them, etc. And that can be found by joining those groups at remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn. Today's episode is brought to you by our new book, The Long Distance Team, Designing a Team for Everyone's Success.